Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Learn and Grow series. I'm going to start sharing my screen so that you can all see our nice little slideshow. All right. Welcome to the Learn and Grow series, the educational component of the Williamsburg Botanical Gardens mission. My name is Judith Alberts. I serve on the board of directors, and I'm also your speaker today. A bit of housekeeping. Let me advance the slide. Oops. I always do this. Hold on one second. Now it should work. There we go. Housekeeping. Yes, we are recording this session, and we'll send a link to the replay within 48 hours. Last time I said 24 hours, and we had some glitches, so I'm giving myself some extra time. If all goes well and I haven't embarrassed myself too horribly, it'll be posted publicly on YouTube. All participants hopefully are muted, and please type your questions in the chat box. I will answer them at the end. And please bear with me because I'm a volunteer like everyone else at the garden. I know many of you are longtime garden supporters. You've come to Learn and Grow sessions when we had them at Freedom Park in the Interpretive Center. You have volunteered at the garden and visited often. But for anyone who is not familiar, basic information, the Williamsburg Botanical Garden is free and open every day from 7 a.m. until dusk. It's a tiny thing. Only 2 acres, and it's inside the traffic circle in the road on the way to the Freedom Park parking area. But we pack an awful lot into those 2 acres. We have 18 different types of habitat, including a wildflower meadow, woodlands, an English-style cottage garden, wetlands. And there are 3 types of wetlands: a new succulents rock garden, a fairy garden, and a newly renovated native grasses area, to name only a few. The garden is purposely more natural than what you might expect when you hear the words botanical garden. It is most definitely not a manicured display of high maintenance plantings. It's more like a wild child with an emphasis on native plants that support pollinators. It is an official Monarch butterfly way station, number 3394 to be precise. And those of us who know it know that things change often, and each time we go, we see a different aspect. The garden's mission is to demonstrate environmentally responsible and sustainable gardening practices and to offer education on related topics. Everything in the garden is tended by volunteers who are very dedicated, and we do it all on a very slim budget. So here comes the pitch, as always. The garden is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation and receives no funding from any level of government or any other agency. Our Learn and Grow programs are free, and under normal circumstances, we have a donations jar right at the registration table. Historically, this has been a very reliable source of revenue for the garden. Now that we're virtual, follow-up email with the link to the recording will include a very handy dandy link right to our virtual donations jar. If you'd like to support the garden further, please consider a membership when you visit our website. Now, since many of us are doing more online shopping since COVID-19 hit, I'd like to point out that a portion of your Amazon purchases can support the garden or any other charitable organization, nonprofit that you choose when you start at smile.amazon.com. I will also include that handy link in the follow-up email. If you order bulbs from Brent and Becky's in Gloucester, their Bloom and Bucks program will support the garden. They give a very generous 25% of orders to the organization of your choice, but you have to start at bloomandbucks.com. You'll also find us on Facebook and YouTube. And for those of you who are raising monarchs, please join us on the Milkweed Connection. That is a Facebook group. The Learning Guru programming is going to continue to be virtual for the rest of this year. Next week, we'll be hanging out with the Virginia, it's the Historical Rivers chapter of the Master Naturalists, Bat Squad. It's totally appropriate for October and Halloween. November, we'll have Brian Tabor, who is the chairman for the Coastal Virginia Wildlife Observatory. His topic is how everything is connected. We take December off, and in January we hope to have a pruning workshop in person. Not sure how that's going to pan out, so stay tuned to your email inbox for announcements. Last item before I start is that Master Gardeners and Master Naturalists can count this towards continuing education in the Virginia Volunteer Management System. So let's get started. Again, I'm Judith Alberts. I am an Extension Master Gardener speaker with the James City County Williamsburg unit. And today's topic is Butterfly Trek, the Amazing Monarch Migration. Those of you who know me know that I will talk about butterflies at the drop of a hat, so I love having a captive audience. I want to be clear, I'm a butterfly enthusiast. I am not a butterfly breeder because breeding is highly regulated by the USDA. There are all kinds of permits that are required for interstate movement, and that's because specific species in specific areas could be considered pests because they are not part of the native population. And an interesting side note along those lines, monarchs may not be shipped, or a monarch in any stage, whether it's a larva, an egg, or chrysalis, or an adult, cannot be shipped across the continental divide because the east of the Rockies has a distinct population and west of the Rockies has a totally different population. So I got started in raising butterflies in general because I went to the Monarch Tag and Release 8 years ago. It's hard to believe. And for the first time in my life, I held a butterfly. It was one of the most magical moments of my life. And in that third picture, you see the tag. It's very small, about 1/4 of an inch in diameter. And that was tag number RCZ177. Every year, monarchwatch.org issues a new set of tags so that, and you can't use, if you are tagging monarchs, you cannot use old tags from years past because that just confuses the issue. This allows them to, Monarch Watch, to gather data on the migration and the populations. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit for general information. Quick question that always comes is, how can you tell if something is a butterfly or a moth? And the basic distinction is that butterflies fly during the day and most moths are nocturnal, active at night. You'll notice there's an asterisk, and I'll show you an example in a moment. Now here's a common mistake that people make. They'll say that a butterfly comes out of its cocoon. Butterflies do not make cocoons. When they pupate, they form a chrysalis, and moths pupate inside a cocoon. So it's a very distinct difference. I have 2 pictures coming up that show that butterfly antennae, which are smooth and they have like little clubs at the end, and moth antennae are usually feathery. Here's a black swallowtail, and you can see the very slender, long antenna. Moth antennae look like feather dusters. That, by the way, is a Sucropium moth, which is the largest moth in North America I found its chrysalis in an azalea bush right here on my property, and it's 3.5 inches long. And as you can see from the size, that's my hand, so that's like a wingspan of about 6 inches. They are just magnificent. Now here's the example that I was wanted to show you of a daytime moth, and you see them often. These are clear wing moths. There are several species. They fly during the day, and they're often called hawk moths or hummingbird moths. Their wings are clear and they move like small hummingbirds. Interestingly enough, their host plant is, they have two, honeysuckle and dogbane. There are also skippers, which are part of the butterfly family. They behave like a butterfly, but they look more like a moth. They have short, thick bodies and delta wings with a quick, erratic flight. And that's what I'm seeing most of in my garden at this particular time of year. I've had some interesting experiences last year and this year of actually raising some skippers, and they pupate in a kind of a different manner. It's really interesting to watch. So I'm going to get into the monarch life cycle now. There's a migration that takes 4 generations, and they start in Mexico, go to Canada, and then head back to Mexico. And right now, we're at the point, here we are in Virginia, you see on the map. The monarchs are heading south. Many of them will sort of get down into Florida and they stay there. They can have a year-long population there. But you'll see that they're staying east of the Rockies, and west of the Rockies, there's that other population. They are heading down to a spot in Mexico. And by the way, here's a slide of this. I pulled this screenshot today from Journey North, and I'll share that that website with you a little bit later. As of this morning, they are seeing monarchs already getting into Mexico. But the migration isn't okay, everybody on the bus and we're gonna arrive in Boston and on such and such a date. It's a rolling migration. And in fact, I still have 2 chrysalises that just pupated last week. So in about a week, they will, maybe 1 more week, because now it's getting cooler at night, and that affects how long they stay in their chrysalis. They'll be ready. I have had chrysalises as late as November. So it's a rolling type of thing. But they're all headed down to Mexico, to an area west of Mexico City, the Mariposa Sanctuary butterfly. Now in the spring, they're going to wake up sometime around February, or it depends on the weather. It could be they start stirring in January and February, but they're going to be down there in the high mountainous region, nested on the oyamel fir trees in that particular area. When they wake up, what they're actually doing is following their food supply for the caterpillars. So they start flying up, entering Texas and the Panhandle, and then splitting out to the east, and then up and through the heartland of the states. Now, it takes 4 generations, and sometimes there's actually a 5th extra generation. That's one of the things that the scientists are studying. But each generation goes through this particular life cycle. Excuse my frogginess here. Once a butterfly egg is laid, a monarch egg, it's going to take 4 to 5 days, and then it's going to hatch. The caterpillar the larva. It will be in that stage for 10 to 14 days, and that's going to depend on on weather conditions. The cooler it is, the slower they grow. It'll remain in chrysalis for 10 to 14 days, and then the adult will live 2 to 6 weeks, and that's dependent upon conditions. But the generation that flies to Mexico will last 8 to 9 months as they overwinter up there in the mountains. And it's often referred to as the super generation. This generation of monarchs have been emerging and flying through this area, you may notice that they're much bigger than the ones that we see during the summer. They have a larger wingspan. Everything about them is designed to make that long trip south, and then they go into diapause where they are not actively breeding and their entire system slows down. It's it's not exactly hibernation, but similar to it. So the first year that I came to Virginia, which was in 2000, well, first time I was able to have a garden was 2014, and the first thing I planted was milkweed. And those of you who know your milkweed can see that that is tropical milkweed, and I planted that because by the time I was getting my milkweed, it was the only thing available, and I didn't really know better. There, I was very excited all summer long. I had milkweed, it was growing well, but I didn't see any monarchs. I didn't understand at that point that we don't see that many monarchs here in Williamsburg. We're not kind of on the main flight path heading north in the spring. In the summer, we have a few, but we do see a lot in the fall coming down when they're heading south. So I was just thrilled to actually be able to catch a monarch laying her egg. And you'll see she's holding on with those little claw-like feet, and her abdomen is curled up and she is about to oviposit. Monarchs almost always lay their eggs on the underside of the leaf of milkweed. They're tiny things. You have to have sharp eyes to catch them, but those of us who are monarch mamas and papas, we know what to look for. Now I have a video. I'm not sure if the sound is going to play, but this is a monarch egg hatching under the microscope. So the first meal that the monarch has is its own eggshell. So I'm going to stop this because it goes on for a little bit more. Oops, there we go. Thank you for the couple of chats, those comments. So it's really, really tiny. When it first emerges, it's only about a 1/16 of an inch long. And then they grow and grow and grow. Whoops, I didn't just want to go. There we go. And over the years, I've done things like kept spreadsheets on how much they grew from one day to the other. And then when I got into the point where I was doing hundreds at a time, that certainly went by the wayside. But it is fascinating to watch how they just get so big. They go from a 1/16 of an inch to 1.5 to 2 inches. Now, when they're done eating, and the only job a caterpillar has is to eat and grow, and while it's eating, it does a whole lot of pooping, but at a certain point, there are hormones in its body that just sort of say, okay, you're done, stop eating, and they will walk away from their food source, usually walk away from their food source. And what they're basically doing is emptying out their intestinal tract, their gut, so that they can pupate. I found these on iris leaves. And they may not move fast, but they can certainly move a great distance. I've also found them on the siding, on the house, underneath a chair cushion. I'm hanging from the frame of a chair. So it's like, don't move that chair. And when you first see it, they hang in a J upside down for about 10 to 24 hours, again, depending on things. But you know that something's going to happen when you see the feelers. These are not antennae, they're feelers. They start going very limp and they kind of turn into corkscrews. It's hanging by a silk pad that it has spun and attached its posterior to. When it first pupates, it doesn't look like what we expect it to look like. Instead, it still looks a lot like a caterpillar. But in about an hour to 2 hours, it takes on the look of the typical monarch chrysalis, that beautiful, beautiful green. I do have a video of Monarch and Jay. And these photographs were done over the span of almost 6 hours, but pupation itself only took about 6 minutes. So here we go. And the way that I raise my monarchs is that each one is in a condo. I call it a caterpillar condo. And it almost always climbs to the top and hangs upside down on the lid, so I'm able to move it here. And here's where the skin starts to split. And I often describe this as having zipped yourself into a parka and then the zipper breaks and you are trying, a big heavy winter parka, and you are trying to wiggle your way out of this coat. So there it's taking shape into the typical chrysalis. So after it's hung out in its chrysalis, again, 10 to 14 days, the cooler the temperature, the longer it's going to take. I have had some like within 8 days, but typical. There we go. So I had 2 monarchs. Actually, I had a whole bunch of them at the same point on this particular day. And I kept trying to photograph them. And I kept missing it because I would be in the middle, and I finally ended up with 2. This always reminds me of synchronized swimming. And as they are hanging, you can just see those wings filling. The proboscis, when it first, if you look carefully, you'll see it's actually in two parts. It's flipping it up and down, curling it and uncurling it, and basically almost like zipping it together into a siphon. And they'll hang out. Once the wings are filled, they are still very fragile. They need to harden, which can take 2 to 3 hours. I never handle my monarchs until they start flapping around. They either walk away or climb up from where they're going or start flapping around in the container. So, basic question, how do you tell a male and a female? Females, and this is true whether it's the large generation that's going to go to Mexico or any other generation in between, the female is usually slightly larger than the male, and you'll notice these dark markings. They're not veins, but they look like it. They are heavier, thicker than here on the male. The other telltale sign is the 2 black spots on the hind wings. And if you are able to get a look at its posterior, the male actually has claspers right at the end so that he can hold on to the female while mating. Basic question here, what do monarchs need? They need nectar-rich flowers, as do all pollinators. I call the nectar plants the juice bar. These are the ones that almost any butterfly can, if their proboscis can reach the nectar, any butterfly, moth, bee, wasp, moth, anything can take nectar from it. So it's a big juice bar. And these are considered some of the real heavy-duty, good pollen, or good nectar-producing flowers. A little bit of note, some notes here. Joe Pyeweed, oh my goodness. Pollinators love it, but it does not smell good. I made the mistake once of bringing some in because I had a special needs butterfly that I could not release. It was not able to fly. So I created a little habitat with flowers, etc. And I brought in some Joe Pyeweed, and I kept thinking, what is that awful smell? It does not have a good smell, but they love it. Black-eyed Susans are always wonderful for everything. Goldenrod, and Goldenrod is, we also have a new Goldenrod garden at the Botanic Garden. I forgot to mention that. Goldenrod is not the one that produces allergies. Butterfly bush, people are, there are mixed feelings about butterfly bushes as to whether or not they are invasive, but I have one that just grows like crazy, and it always is filled with all the butterflies that are around, love it, as do skippers and the bees. So yeah, I guess you just have to keep it under control. If you're doing things, if you're planting zinnias, get the old-fashioned open zinnia instead of the ones that are big and bushy and look more like chrysanthemums. And of course, lantana. Lantana is a great favorite, and everyone loves it. The other thing that monarchs need are host plants. I call that the maternity ward or the nursery. Now, there are over 100 species of milkweed, but Virginia natives are going to grow best here, and these are the most common, and that's common milkweed, which can get to be 6, 7, 8 feet tall, swamp milkweed, and butterfly milkweed. So those are anything in the family Asclepias can be a host for the monarchs. The ones that grow in Texas may not grow well here in Virginia. So that's why we really encourage people to work with natives. The tropical milkweed, again, pros and cons on that. Some people are adamant about it. It becomes a problem in places where it does not die back. Here it is not hardy, but it can, there are some varieties of it that can become somewhat invasive and crowd out our good natives. So I mentioned, first garden was in 2014 for years and years and years, and I, at that butterfly release at the Botanical Garden, was, oh, if you plant it, they will come. And that's actually true of all butterflies. If you have the host plant, you will see the butterfly in your garden. So there she is, ovipositing. That's that egg under the microscope. The first year I tried raising it, I didn't know what I was doing. I was using little yogurt containers. And what I discovered was that eventually sometimes they crawl off of that. So I went to some other method, but they're great fun to photograph. And this is an example of a caterpillar that has just shed its skin. That is that funky pile over here. It has just kind of walked out of its skin. Again, kind of like trying to get out of a parka. It just wiggles its way out, and when it first comes out, its feelers are all slicked back against its body. And these little things are frass from some other caterpillars. That's what those black dots are. So if you're going to raise monarchs, you have to be very aware of keeping the containers or enclosures clean, because you don't want them crawling around in their own doo-doo, which, by the way, has its own name, frass. So a good way that you can look at somebody and say, I have had enough of your frass, and you can get away with it. Another example of a of a caterpillar that has just shed its skin. Second year, I went to using caterpillar condos in various containers, and yes, I could be called a crazy cat lady, and this was my dear Elliot, who was my able assistant. Third year, I tried a few other things. I know that many people like to put the plants or sprigs of plants. There are all kinds of test tube and test tube racks that people have tried. I know other people like to use larger containers, and they will raise multiple caterpillars within one container. But I look at it and it's like, how easy is it to clean this out? I would rather spend more time cleaning individual containers than trying to deal with stuff that is very hard to get clean. The disadvantage in my mind, excuse me, is that when they are in a container like this, one of the butterfly hampers, they will, when they want to go on their walkabout to clear their gut just before they pupate, they will end up attaching themselves to the mesh. They will attach themselves to the zipper area. So again, in my mind, I like separating them so that they are not contaminating each other. They're also not bothering each other, and I can keep track of their progress a little bit easier. One year, I had over 300 caterpillars all at one time. It was a bit of a crazy time. My kitchen was entirely taken over, and my utility room. And I am sorry to see that Trader Joe's no longer is using the containers with the lids. So I'm very pleased that I probably have about 400 of these containers, which can be reused. And I will mark them with various things. You know, they went into, this group went into chrysalis on the 16th. These two went on the 17th, and I have little notations. And sometimes when I see a caterpillar that is odd, you know, it may have an odd marking on it, which happens, I'll put a little note on the container and let that note follow it all the way through the process. I'd like to have the caterpillars in their containers so that when they crawl to the lid, I can take the lid off to photograph it. This is my daughter and two of my grandchildren, and they were watching the pupation. It was interesting because I was trying to describe it. My granddaughter is not in this picture, but as the skin was splitting, you know, as I showed in that other sequence, I was describing. I wanted to let them know. I said, now you're going to see the skin split and it's going to start sort of popping out. And Tegan said, that's disgusting. And I said, no, it's magical. So then when her mom came down the next day, it was really fun to listen to Tegan explain, now Mom, the skin is going to split, but it's not disgusting. It's really magical. So this was one year when I was numbering all of the chrysalises, and I have since stopped doing that, but I will group them by date. But you can tell when a chrysalis is going to be ready because it darkens. One year we had 2 or 3 days of storm, and I had about 60 monarchs emerge all at the same time, and so I had them in various hampers, and they can go for the first 12 to 24 hours without feeding, but after that they're going to have a problem. So I wanted to make sure that they were well fed. They were tagged, so they are feeding from little bottle caps with a honey water solution, and I would put 2, or sometimes I would put 2 together. And when you know that they're finished, when they actually walk away and they start crawling upside down on the colander, and I would put them into another container because they had already been fed. I think it's very common knowledge that the monarch populations have dropped. This figure says dropped 90%. It's probably greater at this point, but this is due to loss of habitat. Where milkweed used to grow, we've either paved it over or agricultural practices have changed how things are planted. Certain pesticides kill good weed. There's illegal logging activity up in the Mexican reserve areas, which is a real problem. And the biggest of all, or perhaps not the biggest of all, but certainly a large impact is climate change. So if you're interested if you've never tagged, monarchwatch.org is a wealth of information, and this is where you buy the tags. Call yourself a citizen scientist. If you have a large enough area and have all the right things, you can become an official monarch way station. So, great information. This is a screenshot, so I'm not going to even try and click on anything here. Tagging is, as I said, the tag is about 1/4 of an inch and has specific information. If a butterfly with the tag is found, if the person who tagged it has submitted their information, which we're supposed to, but sometimes people tag and forget to send in their information, where Monarch Watch is able to identify where was that butterfly released, when was it released, and where was it found. Now, of course, out of the millions of butterflies, they don't find, the percentage of tags is something like, less than 0.1%. I mean, just a very small number of tags are found, but that is enough to help study and give data. It's a very special adhesive. The tag is super lightweight. It's almost like a Tyvek, and the adhesive does not hurt. After you place the label, you just have to hold it for about 5 seconds. No butterflies were harmed. And each tag says tag at KU Monarch Watch. There's a 800 number, and the UCA 750 on that tag is unique. That is a unique number. So if it had been found, they would know that it was released from Williamsburg, Virginia on whatever date. When the butterflies are first emerged, newly emerged, they are actually rather docile and easy to handle. But give them a couple hours. Once their wings have hardened, they're ready to go. They're ready to go. So here are some resources for you. Again, monarchwatch.org. Oh, I'm sorry, I left off Journey North, but I'll screen share that in a minute. The Xerces Society, which is all about all invertebrates. But certainly the butterflies are front and foremost. The North American Butterfly Association, the Butterfly Society of Virginia, and then there's another thing that is of great scientific concern, and that's Project Monarch Health, because there is a parasite called OE. And as you can see, there's that Latin, and I am not even going to try to pronounce it because I will butcher it, sadly. But it is a parasite, and it affects more than just the monarch. But, since the monarch is the poster child of butterflies, that's where we're getting most of our knowledge. And the effects of it are that it can actually make a caterpillar fail to thrive. Excuse me. I have had several chrysalises that you start seeing the chrysalis darkening in spots. You start seeing black spots, and that's not good. And sometimes it's best to actually destroy that chrysalis by freezing it and then disposing of it. So that's more information about the OE. And if you really want to get into it, you can actually sample, take a sample from a butterfly, from its abdomen. You use Scotch tape to pull off some of the scales, and then you send it off to them, and they put it under a microscope. If you have a strong enough microscope, you could look at it yourself to see if these protozoans are there. So thank you. I am going to look at the, let's see here. I guess I have to stop. Oh, yeah, I have to stop sharing my screen to see if there are any chat questions. Okay, thank you for the compliments. From Pat, how do you become certified to raise monarchs? And no, you don't become certified. you learn as you go. You learn from other butterfly enthusiasts. And the way to make sure you're not passing on that OE is to if you're just letting them be in the yard, it's almost impossible because a butterfly may pick up the OE as an adult, and as she's laying an egg, pass it on to the egg that's being laid. But those who are really, really dedicated will harvest their milkweed and wash it in a very weak solution, about 5% bleach. And of course, then you have to rinse it very well, but that will kill the OE, wash it away and or kill it. I have done it to some degree. I'm not as dedicated as perhaps I should be. And thank you for your compliment. Someone wants to know, what is the proportion of honey water that I use for feeding monarchs? I use, number one, organic honey, and I use 1 part honey to 6 parts water. You can change that up. Other enthusiasts like using juicy juice. And I did have one butterfly who was with me for a long, long time. And I tried various combinations where I put a little juicy juice in with the honey water, but to me, honey water is simpler. Then another, thank you very much. All right, if you grow it, they will come, and yes, they did. Excellent. Oh, I have someone from Seattle, Washington. Oh my gosh, thank you, Kathy. Well, I have a friend who lives, let me go back to that map here. Let's see, let's go back. Let me go back, let me try and find that map. I have a friend who lives just outside of Seattle, and she sees monarchs. So let's see here. No. No, they do. I'll share the screen here. Slideshow from the current slide. Go Zoom meeting, share screen. There we go. Yeah, here's the Canadian border. You know, and we see monarchs and all up in Canada. But yes, they do. They do go down. And the Western population. Oh, I see the rest of your question. I'm sorry, I didn't read the question, Kathy, all the way. I don't know the answer. You asked why. You know, we see them, but not too often. And I don't know. It just may be that they're happier hanging out a little further south. So I will stop the share again. And if there are no other questions, I think we'll call it a day. But thank you so much for coming. We'll send a link to the recording in a bit. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.